Every year or two I like to put a bit of a recap together to bring us up to speed. For any new players coming along, there has been quite a bit of story covered across the two games, and looking at my channel alone, there have been around 140 videos talking about the Division timeline. So this will be a somewhat summarised picture of the Division story so far. But for anyone interested in more detail, I'll have links to the other videos on screen and in the description. Following Black Friday, retail's busiest day of the year, a number of people began getting sick, and it was spreading noticeably fast. Initially, the symptoms were mistaken for a severe case of the flu. However, when people started dying from it, medical personnel quickly began investigating and eventually discovered that it seemed to be an outbreak of the previously eradicated smallpox virus. To combat the outbreak, the smallpox vaccine was distributed to the public. But unfortunately, the vaccine was quickly proven ineffective, and devastatingly, things were about to get a whole lot worse. The city's infrastructure was starting to break down, hospitals were becoming overloaded, and the New York police force was struggling to maintain the peace, and a number of gangs of rioters were starting to carve out their own territories within the city. Eventually the government assembled a new line of defense, hoping to help maintain order. This group was composed of the police, firefighters, civil volunteers, and the National Guard, and they were known as the Joint Task Force, or JTF. Their job? To stop the spread of the virus and uphold order within the city. The plan was simple. All known infected individuals would be relocated to the center of the city, separate from the uninfected. And in order to stop these people from leaving and mixing with the public, a large wall would be built around the quarantine area. This way the spread would be contained, and they would be in a better position to get the appropriate personnel and bring them in directly to where the help was needed. But eventually, the situation got worse, and more than what the JTF could handle, and the sickness too was starting to affect their numbers. Then, one of the private military contractors brought in to help them keep the peace, known as the Last Man Battalion, cut ties with the JTF and started taking control of parts of the city for themselves. And on top of this, there were a number of other hostile factions starting to rise, like the Cleaners and the escaped convicts, known as the Rikers. This is when the first wave of the Strategic Homeland Division agents were activated. Their goal? To assist the JTF and regain control of the city. Unfortunately, it was too late. Shortly after the first wave division agents were released into the Dark Zone, the government and the JTF pulled out, leaving behind supplies, medicine, weapons, thousands of infected, and the first wave agents. Abandoned and cut off from the outside world, many agents succumbed to the virus, or were killed off by the growing hostile factions within the quarantine zone, the area that would later be known as the Dark Zone. And the first wave of division agents were labelled MIA and presumed dead. As a result, this is the event that triggered the second wave to be activated. Their goal was to investigate what happened to the first wave and assist the JTF in restoring order to New York City. The commander in charge, along with the majority of the second wave division agents, was being flown in by helicopter and was to assemble themselves just outside of the hostile zone. But as they were landing, they were unexpectedly struck by an inbound missile, which caused the helicopter to crash, killing everyone on board. It was now down to just a couple of the remaining SHD agents to carry out the mission. New York City was in a horrific state, and there were a number of rumours of how the rest of the world wasn't doing much better either. Hostile factions had sectioned off parts of the city, fighting for territory. There were the Rikers, who had escaped from the prison on Rikers Island. They took advantage of the dwindling prison staff, who were either sick or no longer turning up to work. Once on the mainland, their goal was to wreak as much havoc on society as possible, the society that had had them locked away, especially authority figures like the JTF. Other groups weren't necessarily born out of hate. The Cleaners came about with the best of intentions. They were among the thousands of civilians left behind in the Dark Zone when the JTF pulled out. These were the workers that were helping the JTF and keeping the city infrastructure ticking along. Construction workers, sanitation, janitors, garbage men, truck drivers. They were also heavily involved in the construction of the quarantine zone wall. But when the JTF suddenly packed up and left, these civilians decided to take it upon themselves to do what was needed to contain the virus and restore order to the streets of New York. And the way that they decided to do this is to burn everything that had been in contact with the virus. Contaminated items, the bodies of those who had died, and anyone living that may have become infected. The LMB, or Last Man Battalion, are a private military contractor made up of US military veterans. They were hired by large Wall Street companies wanting to protect their assets. The LMB worked alongside the JTF to start with, but as time went on, they watched the city go from bad to worse. Sick of the indecisive local authorities and the government's complete lack of ability to control the situation, the LMB decided it was up to them to restore order to the city. They broke their contract and cut ties with the JTF, executing an officer in the process. From here, they proceeded to do what they deemed as necessary to rectify the situation at hand. Second wave agents eventually found that the source of the virus outbreak came from New York department store, Abel's, and that the man responsible was a Dr. Gordon Amherst. Their mission was now to locate Amherst and find out what he knows in order to develop a cure. However, the second wave was also about to make another revelation. It was discovered that the first wave agents weren't all dead. In fact, they were very much alive and now working against the government. They'd gone rogue. After the government pulled out of the quarantine zone, the first wave agents were unhappy with how things had been handled by the JTF, and this is where we're introduced to a prominent figure in the division storyline, Aaron Keener. Aaron Keener was a first wave agent who, after the abandonment of the quarantine zone, became disillusioned with the government, its plan to save the city, and his role within the division. Keener disavowed the division and went rogue. His first action after turning against the government was to recruit other first wave agents into his new focus of survival and power. Any agents that refused were killed, causing other agents to cut communications and go into hiding. After forming his group of rogue agents, Keener met up with the commanding officer of the Last Man Battalion. They agreed to collaborate through a deal that would benefit them both. Keener wanted to use the LMB to assist in operations to establish dominance over Manhattan, and the LMB wanted access to the division shade technology to gain advantage over the other hostile groups. Keener, with the LMB, launched many operations against the opposing groups, including the JTF, the most notable one being an attack on a helicopter that was carrying a division commander that was in charge of the second wave of division agents. During his time working with the LMB, Keener was also investigating the virus outbreak. He found that Dr. Gordon Amherst was responsible. Keener's investigation led him to Dr. Vitaly Tronenko in the Russian consulate, who was also researching the virus. He organized some of his rogue agents to kidnap Tronenko and his research. Keener then found Amherst's lab, as well as some of the virus samples, a 3D DNA printer, and Amherst's notes. His plan is to use Tronenko and the samples to weaponize the virus and use it to fulfill his belief that only those who are smart enough and good enough survive. The old rules, laws, and governments are gone. Now, only power and survival matter. It was at this time that Amherst was found. Shortly after the outbreak, it was discovered that Amherst had fallen to his own creation. Notes and recordings detailed why he did it. His reason for creating and spreading the virus was that humanity was too powerful on a global scale, and Mother Nature needed help in advancing her creations. Mankind is the greatest threat to the survival of the planet through their own greed, but he had the cure. Amherst had a Darwinist point of view. Only the strong deserve to live, and his creation is the tool to ensure that this happens. But at the same time, he is willing and accepted that his death may come from his own creation. He was able to modify the basic smallpox virus by combining it with several other dangerous diseases, like Ebola and H1N1. On top of this, he also modified the genetic traits that controlled the incubation period, and made it so that it could spread even while it was incubating in the host. This made it particularly lethal, because by the time the host was showing symptoms, it had already spread to a significant number of others. Using a protein printer, Amherst was able to create the final form of his virus, just in time for Black Friday. His plan was to spread this new virus by means that were most handled during the shopping holiday: money. Hence the name, the dollar flu. Slowly, the second wave division agents and the JTF were able to push back the hostile factions and regain control of the city. The Rikers and cleaner leadership was taken care of, crippling their advances. The LMB were pushed back into their final stronghold, located in the United Nations building. During the lengthy battle, Keener betrays the LMB and escapes with Trinenko and his fellow rogue agents. The LMB is left to slowly be taken apart by the division agents. It was later discovered that Keener had spent some time on the West Side Pier. At this stage, all hostile groups had feuds against him, most of all the LMB. He broadcasted his location to bring all hostile factions to the area to hunt him down, which in turn brought the JTF and the division agents, whose distraction helped keep the hostile groups from finding him. He also taunted the division agents, stating that no one would ever find him, and despite the quarantines and lockdowns of the island, he'll soon be gone. At this time, it's now confirmed that Aaron Keener is long gone from Manhattan and New York City altogether. There is confirmation that Keener is, or was, in Washington, but he continues to leave messages for the JTF and other government agents to convince them of his ways and beliefs, and to join him and his agents in working against the government. His final message was to inform the division that his eyes are not just set on the United States, but now the world. Seven months have passed since the green poison outbreak and the events that unfolded in New York City. Division agents have continued on with their mission of saving what remains across the United States, when suddenly their lifeline was severed. The SHD network, the backbone of their advanced technology and communications, goes dead, quickly followed up by the backup protocol of a distress call that summons all agents to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Agents from outside of DC make their way to the capital. Fighting their way through the city, they come across what remains of the city's Joint Task Force, who have set up their base of operations in the White House. SHD coordinators on site fill in the agents of what's happening throughout the city. Three hostile factions are fighting for control. The Hyenas, a group that is composed of several gangs who have come together as one under the leadership of a council to take advantage of the chaos that is unfolding. The Outcasts, a group made up of survivors of the Roosevelt Island quarantine zone, their goal to enact revenge on those responsible for their mistreatment and to the society that allowed it to happen. And the True Sons, a powerful group of ex-JTF who have lost faith in the government's ability to bring control to the situation at hand. The division agents get to work finding the fault to restore the SHD network, but before they can achieve this, new information comes to light. Somewhere in the city, there may in fact be a cure to the virus that started it all, but also that the previously assumed dead President Ellis may have survived the crash of Air Force One. While clearing out areas through the city, the agents find intel on Ellis's whereabouts and that he's being held captive by the Hyenas. The division managed to clear the hostiles and extract him via helicopter. Back at the White House, Ellis confirms that there is in fact a cure, but not just for the green poison, but all viral infections. However, he is unable to access it without his briefcase, and this was on Air Force One when it went down. The briefcase was in the possession of the True Sons, and they were holding it in their HQ at the US Capitol building. President Ellis ordered the agents to do what it takes to cleanse the city of these hostile forces and return his briefcase. However, the division wasn't strong enough to be able to tackle this challenge just yet. First things first, they located the fault in the network and restored power to the Strategic Homeland Division and their agents. From here, they set forth clearing the hostiles and pushing them back to their respective strongholds. Upon removing the Hyenas from District Union Arena, the Outcasts from Roosevelt Island, and then the True Sons from the US Capitol building, the division has now eliminated all hostile leadership, leaving the factions in a state of disarray. But also, they had found Ellis's briefcase. While the agents and the JTF celebrated their progress towards regaining the control of the capital, a force that had been lurking in the shadows suddenly made themselves known. The technologically advanced private military company called the Black Tusk launched a full invasion of the city. Landmarks and strategic points throughout the city were quickly brought under Black Tusk control, and it was during this time that President Ellis suddenly disappeared. It was revealed that the Black Tusk had been watching the progress of the dollar flu outbreak for some time, including the actions of the Strategic Homeland Division. Division agents soon found out that it was this new hostile force that was responsible for the SHD network being taken down, and that they had been planning this invasion since the outbreak first occurred. The Black Tusk had, in very quick succession, completely undone all of the progress that the division had made up until now. Unwavered, the agents, against all odds, once again fought through. It was discovered that President Ellis had actually handed over the antivirals to the Black Tusk, and that they had been working together, and in fact had something to do with the death of the last president that had him put in power. The antivirals were being held at the Black Tusk Tidal Basin headquarters. The agents launched an attack and managed to fight through the technologically superior forces, regaining control of the antivirals. Washington DC is once again in a state of mayhem, with the three original hostile factions, although without their original leaders, fighting for control, and now a new, more powerful faction attempting to establish a new dynasty to lead the country into a new era. President Ellis was located. He was found to be hiding out at the presidential retreat, Camp White Oak. Under heavy guard by the Black Tusk forces, the JTF and the division assault the compound in an attempt to arrest Ellis and bring him back for questioning. Unfortunately, before they could reach him, he managed to escape. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The division agents then turned their attention to the Pentagon. They have received a transmission from an agent close by. This agent was scouting the DARPA labs to see if they had succeeded in developing a perfusion bioreactor. With this device, they will be able to produce large quantities of the broad-spectrum antivirals and start to distribute them across the population. However, they weren't the only ones looking for it. A large-scale Black Tusk operation was underway. They were attempting to dig down through the Pentagon and extract the bioreactor. But the division agents managed to put a stop to this, in turn killing dozens of Black Tusk officers. The perfusion bioreactor is now being kept at the White House, along with the broad-spectrum antivirals. The next step towards creating the cure requires the agent to find someone capable of running such an undertaking, someone with experience in this field. The division receives intel on the whereabouts of a former agent who is at the top of their most wanted list. Aaron Keener has finally resurfaced after disappearing months ago, last seen in New York City. Keener has made a deal with the Black Tusk unit that is stationed on Coney Island. He is planning on trading Vitaly Tronenko in exchange for a favor that he'll call upon at a later date. Tronenko is a virologist that had ties to the creator of the dollar flu, Dr. Gordon Amherst. The division saw this as a great opportunity. Keener is the man behind countless deaths of JTF and SHD agents, and the leader of the initial rogue agent uprising, and Tronenko would be the perfect candidate to run the bioreactor. This situation was too good to let it slip by. Aware they could be running into a trap, the division launched an operation to rescue Tronenko and capture Keener. Despite heavy Black Tusk presence, they managed to extract the Russian scientist. To their surprise, an old foe had joined the fight, the Cleaners. The Black Tusk suffered heavy losses at the hands of both the Cleaners and the division agents. They were forced to retreat. A distress call was received from the division command in Lower Manhattan. City Hall has been attacked. Agents from Washington make their way to New York. Through video surveillance, it is found that a group of rogues led by Aaron Keener were the ones responsible. The attack left the building completely destroyed and contaminated by a new unknown virus that Keener had acquired from Vitaly Tronenko before they parted ways. The hunt for Aaron Keener was on. The division agents set up a base in a local settlement called Haven, where the local commanding agent, FAYE got to work compiling clues on Keener's whereabouts. With all that had happened over the last few months in New York, with countless once loyal agents going rogue, faith in the division was at an all-time low. Agents would have to regain the trust of the remaining population if they were to succeed. One by one, the agents located and eliminated Keena's rogue lieutenants. Through each encounter, they found new clues and intel on Keena's whereabouts, including his plans to reset society. Keena had set himself up on Liberty Island. His plan was to launch a ballistic missile that was filled with his new weaponized virus on Manhattan. The agents board a ferry and make their way to Liberty Island. But before they make it there, they are attacked by the Black Tusk, who have also learned of Keena's location and are trying to get to him before the division does. They sent ground forces to stop Keena, including a Marauder-class quadcopter and warhounds, but the division agents managed to push through and overwhelm their forces. It was now just the agents and Keena. Even with his new, more advanced SHD tech, Keena was no match for the division agents. They managed to destroy the missile launcher containing the virus and heavily wound Keena. He escaped to the pier, but his injuries proved too much. The division agents caught up to him, and before they could stop him, he activated something on his watch, something he called his legacy. With his dying breaths, he laughed at the agents, telling them they have no idea what's coming, before dying shortly after. It was at this time, broadcasted through Keena's watch, that the division discovered that the acting commander of the division in New York, FAYE, had gone rogue and was working with the Black Tusk. Before the events at City Hall, Keena had spent some time recruiting. He was building an army of rogue agent cells, each tasked with their own mission. This group of rogues were all aligned through Keena's own version of the SHD network, called Anna. The first cell was headed by an agent going by the call sign, Jupiter, with her team of rogues supported by the cleaners, running a distraction in Washington, D.C. She was able to secure a newly developed EMP technology from a cargo plane that had crashed on Roosevelt Island. This new technology was able to neutralize all non-rogue SHD tech and completely remove an agent's armor. Jupiter's mission was to capture this tech, get it operational, and ship it out to all rogue agents nationwide. This would cripple the remaining SHD agents around the country. However, the division was able to overwhelm her forces and react faster than Jupiter was prepared for. On Roosevelt Island, she ordered the cleaners to utilize all available EMP jammers to put a stop to the fast-approaching agents. But it was too late. The division pushed through the defenses, destroying the EMPs, and found themselves face-to-face with Jupiter. And eventually, after a long battle, the agents put a stop to her plans, killing her in the process. Unfortunately for the division, this would be just the first of a potentially large number of rogue cells that the division would face in the months to come. Having technically already died once before, one of Keena's lieutenants from earlier on in the conflict is back, and more loyal to Keena's cause than ever. Hornet, Keena's most trusted agent, is leading a cell of rogues to fulfill his legacy. Once in DC, Hornet set forth with recruiting. He saw the outcasts as a good place to start, since they're currently leaderless and in need of a purpose. But they aren't exactly friendly to strangers, but he had a different way of getting their attention. After demonstrating the power of Keena's Eclipse virus, the outcasts were more than happy to throw in their support. As per Keena's instructions, Hornet set up at Tidal Basin with his new army of outcasts. He was responsible for continuing the production of the Eclipse virus and getting them ready to be sent out across the country. But the loss of his team of rogues meant that the division was quickly able to locate him. The division assaulted the compound. Hornet instructed the outcasts to put a stop to the agent advances, while the Eclipse virus was being loaded into a hovercraft. But the agents caught up with them, quickly dealing to the outcasts and destroying the samples on board. Hornet launched an attack on the division. However, they proved too much. They were able to bring him down and eliminate him, this time for good. Time and time again, the Black Tusk have been hindering the Strategic Homeland Division's attempts at regaining control of the nation's capital, so it's finally time to remove the BTSU leader from the equation. But now, thanks to FAYE, he has a number of X-Division agents working with him. One by one, the division was able to locate the rogue agents in Lower Manhattan and DC. Although they put up a strong fight, the division agents were quickly able to eliminate them. But these agents were very obviously a distraction, so Barden Schaefer could continue his operation on Coney Island. It was around this time that the division were able to intercept a comms between Barden and someone called Natalia Sokolova. It isn't clear who Natalia is to Barden, but she's certainly the one calling the shots. She could be someone further up the chain within the Black Tusk, or maybe the main contact for the organization that has employed them. Natalia ordered Barden to clean up his mess and finish the job. He instructed his group of elite BTSU operatives to assemble and prepare for the fast-approaching division agents. In a final offensive push, Barden took the fight to the agents, and although he was strong and put up a formidable resistance, they eventually managed to take him down. Barden was critically injured, but not killed. A Halo was sent to retrieve him, where he would be brought back to health and questioned on his knowledge around the Black Tusk and the organization who has employed them. FAYE was one of the division's most trusted agents. However, her mission to avenge the death of her sister and rid the world of Arrakina led her to going rogue and joining the Black Tusk. Although still apprehensive of her decision to join up with the Black Tusk, FAYE meets up with Barden Schaefer to discuss plans going forward. Over time, Schaefer was eventually hunted down by her former colleagues and captured, but FAYE took little time in organising a meeting with President Ellis. After finding out Ellis's whereabouts and schedule, FAYE caught up with him at Camp White Oak, and when the time came, without hesitation, she gunned him down where he stood. At this point in time, division agents were already hot on her trail, but FAYE had already rang through, announcing that it was the division who had taken out the president. So time was of the essence. They needed to catch up with her before they too were announced as rogue. Chasing her through the compound, they eventually caught up with her in the area that Ellis himself had once escaped their grasp. But this time, they were prepared. Disabling the helicopter, FAYE was forced to engage the agents head-on. After a short fight, the division was able to eliminate her supporting BTSU forces. Although FAYE certainly brought the fight, the SHD agents had no problem bringing the full force of their vengeance to the party. And this about sums up everything that's happened in the division up until now, but the story is far from over. Although the division have managed to stop a number of Black Tusk operations and have captured or killed a lot of their leadership, up until this point it has barely slowed their movements. And then there is the organisation behind the BTSU, being led by Natalia Sokolova. While the Black Tusk have the troops on the ground, it's this organisation who is calling the shots. The Division 2 are themselves in a very bad place at the moment. Most of their agents have either been killed or have turned rogue. Those who still remain loyal to the SHD may too be flagged as rogue after the assassination of the president, who up until this point was one of the last remaining officials of the old government. There is considerably more depth to a number of these stories, and I'll have a link to most of them in the description. I've been talking about it for a while, but now might be the time for me to do that video of the full story spanning the two games, where I cover all the details. Given that this could be a 2, 3 or even 4 hour plus video, it pains me to think of how long and how many energy drinks I would need to record this. Anyway, I hope you found this informative, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!